What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and this year's crop of Motorola products is the first year fully under the helm of Lenovo, but has this change had any effect on Motorola's flagship smartphone of the last couple of years, or does the Motorola experience that we've all come to know and love still remain intact? Well, that's what we're about to find out with the Moto X Pure Edition. When looking at the Moto X Pure Edition from the outside, you'll notice a very familiar design that essentially evolves from last year's model. There's some minor aesthetic changes, but the overall look stays true to what Motorola started under the ownership of Google, with the most notable difference this year being the size. It's a much larger phone now, and what once started out as a small, compact smartphone in 2013 is pretty much all but gone. For a phone with a 5.7-inch screen, it doesn't feel as large as you might initially think, and it's surprisingly manageable in one hand thanks to the much tighter bezels all around. It's not the thinnest phone in the world, but the sloping curved back makes it feel thinner than it actually is, and it's very comparable in size to phones like the Note 5 and the OnePlus 2, so if you can handle those phones, you'll be able to handle the Moto X with no problems at all. It's still made of very high quality materials with an all-metal frame that gives it a very solid feel, and the default backs are made of a soft textured silicone material, which I personally love because not only does it feel extremely comfortable, but it also provides a lot of grip. If the default colored backs aren't your thing, you can of course customize it through Moto Maker, which to me has always been one of the best parts about owning a Moto X. There's a ton more options to choose from now than ever before, with a myriad of colored backs, wood backs, leather backs, accent colors, and you can still put your own custom engraving to truly make it your own. A Moto X also wouldn't be a Moto X without the signature Motorola dimple on the backside, which is now encased in a single metallic strip with the camera module and LED flash, and the dimple is back to a much smaller, more subtle size, which I personally like a lot better over the large dimple on last year's Moto X. Taking a tour around the rest of the device, the buttons and ports are in pretty typical locations for a Motorola device. You've got the power and volume buttons on the right side where they're very easy to reach, and the power button still has that same ridged texture that makes it easy to find by feel. On the bottom is the standard micro USB port, and up top is the 3.5mm headphone jack sitting dead center, along with the nano SIM card tray that now doubles as a micro SD card slot for extra storage. On the front side, there's quite a bit of action going on. Besides the typical ambient light and proximity sensors, you have the IR sensors for triggering Moto display without touching the phone, front-facing speakers, and the front-facing camera with a selfie flash, both of which we'll get into a little bit later. The display on this year's Moto X not only received a big bump in display size, but also in resolution. It is now a 5.7-inch screen with a resolution of 2560 by 1440, but unlike the last two Moto X's, it's not AMOLED anymore and has instead been swapped out for a TFT LCD display. I'll admit I am a little bit saddened by the swap in display technology simply because features like Moto Display don't look quite as cool anymore because you can see the entire backlight light up, but otherwise it's a great looking panel. It's bright, beautiful, has great viewing angles, and is pretty easy to see in direct sunlight, and the colors are surprisingly very vibrant and saturated. With a quad HD resolution, it's also extremely sharp, and the large screen size makes it pretty awesome for browsing the web, playing games, and watching videos or movies, so overall I really have no complaints about the display. With the previous two Moto X's, Motorola put a bigger emphasis on the user experience and didn't worry so much about having the latest and greatest specs, and the story is pretty much the same here with the Pure Edition Moto X. Instead of the Snapdragon 810, Motorola took the LG route and opted for the 808, which is perfectly fine by me considering that the 808 is a more than capable processor. There's 3 gigs of RAM on board for all of your multitasking needs, and in everyday use, performance has generally been pretty good as you would expect from a device with high-end specs, and running what is essentially a near stock build of Android. The only hiccup that I've ever noticed is that it sometimes likes to hang on the lock screen when unlocking directly from Moto Display. It doesn't happen all the time, but often enough that you will notice it, but other than that, it opens apps, multitasks, and plays games just as well as the best of them, and hopefully this minor issue can be resolved fairly quickly through a software update. You've got all the usual connectivity options that you might expect, like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, NFC, and of course LTE, and one of the most convenient things about the Moto X is that it supports practically every single LTE band for all the major carriers here in the States. So T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, it doesn't matter which carrier you're on, this phone is essentially just plug and play. So you basically take this phone to any carrier, plug in your SIM card, and you are good to go. For storage, the Moto X comes in either 16, 32 or 64 gigs of internal storage, and like I mentioned earlier, the SIM card slot doubles as a micro SD card slot for up to an additional 128 gigabytes if you need the extra space. As far as the speakers go, they sound awesome on the Moto X this year. They're true front-facing stereo speakers this time around, and on top of being extremely loud, they deliver a very clean and rich sound that really tops off the media experience. I would say they're still not quite as good as HTC's boom sound, but definitely a close second, and they're obviously better than any other phone out there with a single firing speaker. Battery life on the Moto X hasn't been all that great in my experience, even though it's packing a fairly hefty 3000 mAh battery inside, and I can get through a full day, but it's literally by the skin of my teeth, and the phone typically only lasts me about 12 to 13 hours before I finally have to put it back on a charger. And if you like to game a lot on your phone, you can pretty much forget about this phone getting anywhere near a full day. So if I had to rank the battery life of the Moto X against other flagship smartphones, I would say it's definitely better than the S6 for sure, but not as good as something like the Note 5 or even the LG G4. The nice thing about the Moto X though is that it charges extremely fast with Motorola's turbo power charger. Motorola says it's the fastest charging smartphone in the world, which is a pretty bold claim. Whether that's actually true or not is another story entirely, but with the phone turned completely off, I've been able to go from 0 to full in roughly 75 minutes time, making the Moto X pretty easy to fill up or top off anytime during the day. One of the biggest weaknesses of the Moto X line or any Motorola phone in recent years really is the camera, and Motorola is looking to change all of that this year. On the rear is a 21 megapixel sensor with f2.0 aperture but no OAS, and the front facer is a 5 megapixel wide angle lens with an included front facing flash, which is a really nice touch, but considering the front camera does a decent job on its own and is perfectly capable of finding your face in most situations, the flash isn't particularly all that useful unless you happen to take a lot of selfies in pitch black rooms. And even then, the front flash can be blindingly bright and tends to flood the image with harsh lighting more than it does to illuminate it. With the exception of adjusting the focus point and exposure, Motorola's camera interface still lacks a full suite of manual controls that other smartphone camera interfaces offer, but it is very easy to use. You can tap anywhere on the viewfinder to take a photo, swipe left to review any photos that you've taken, or swipe to the right to make adjustments to the camera settings. It's pretty bare bones, but you can do things like toggle through different modes like HDR, night mode, panorama, 4K video recording, and other things of that nature. Picture quality on the Moto X has been surprisingly great, and you can definitely tell Motorola put a very big focus on making the camera experience better on this year's Moto X. In medium to good lighting, photos are very sharp and detailed, and color reproduction is on point with just the right amount of vibrancy and saturation. The HDR image processing on the Moto X has also been quite nice. It does a great job of bringing out a lot of detail from the shadows, especially in high contrast or backlit scenarios, and adds just a little bit of extra saturation and warmth to the images without causing them to look unnatural. Low light performance has also made some really huge strides this year. I would say it's still not as good as something like the S6 or Note 5, but definitely leaps and bounds better than the 2014 Moto X for several reasons. The images are much sharper and more detailed, which you can see pretty easily when zooming into text. The colors and white balance is more accurate. It handles exposure a lot better, especially in the highlights, and most importantly, there's a lot less digital noise. So thumbs up to Motorola for the improved picture quality and for finally producing a camera that is capable of taking photos that people won't feel embarrassed about to share to social media. One of the main reasons why I, and maybe a lot of other users as well, have gravitated to the Moto X for the past couple of years is because of the software experience and how quick Motorola is with updates. Just like previous Moto X's and other Moto devices within the last couple of years, the Moto X Pure Edition is running a near stock build of Android 5.1.1 Lollipop, and because this phone is being sold completely free of carriers, there's no carrier bloatware to get in the way. It's as pure as you can get without buying a Nexus, with the only exception being Motorola's baked-in custom features, which I actually find to all be really useful. Moto Display is still as good as ever, subtly pulsating anytime you receive a notification, and Motorola has added the ability to control your music from it now, which you couldn't do before, so that was a very welcome change. Then you have Moto Voice for dictating voice commands, and you can still customize it with your own key phrase if you'd like, but what I love most about Moto Voice besides the always-on listening is using it for navigation. Being able to tell your phone to navigate home or anywhere that you need to go without having to wake up the phone or touch it at all is extremely useful, especially if you have your phone sitting in a car dock like I do, and it's also a lot safer when you're driving. Speaking of safety, you also have Moto Assist, which can read your text messages out loud and tell you who's calling, or just keep your phone completely quiet to avoid interruptions, and this can also be done anytime you're in a business meeting or simply just need to get some shut-eye. And finally, you have Moto Actions, which are all really nifty and intuitive features. You can wave your hand over the front of the phone to trigger Moto Display, chop twice to trigger the LED flash, and if you take a lot of pictures, you'll find yourself using the double twist of the wrist to launch the camera pretty much on a daily basis. Motorola is taking a different approach with the sales of the Moto X this year. Instead of partnering with carriers, Motorola is selling the phone direct to consumers through Motorola.com, Amazon, and Best Buy for a base price of $400 unlocked, which is an absolute bargain for a smartphone of this caliber. And if you're upgrading from a previous generation Moto X, the Pure Edition is a no-brainer. For $400, you really can't go wrong. You're getting some very high-end specs, great build quality, a large, beautiful, high-resolution display, a camera that won't disappoint, and one of the cleanest and pure Android experiences around. Most importantly, you have Moto Maker, a customization tool that allows users to create a truly unique experience that's yet to be rivaled by anyone, and being able to create a product that is a representation of you is something you can't put a price on. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. And also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And if you want to see more here from us at Android Authority, make sure to check out the links over here on the side. And feel free to follow me on social media. Those links are somewhere right here. And don't forget to check out the website as well, androidauthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.